My neglectful dad and his scheming wife have been trying to push me out of my own home so they can hand it over to my spoiled, pregnant stepsister. Why? Because her boyfriend ditched her, and now she's left with nowhere to go. I'm a 34-year-old man, and my dad, who's 62, has always been stingy, self-absorbed, and largely absent. But ever since he discovered how much money I make these days, he's suddenly decided to take a keen interest in my life. His latest brilliant idea? Forcing me to give up my house to help his wife's daughter. Ash, short for Ashlyn, is 29, and in my dad's eyes, she's practically perfect. Of course, this so-called golden child has managed to get herself pregnant, and because of her ambitious career choices as an escort and a struggling OnlyFans model, she now needs a place to stay. Apparently, my home is the perfect solution to all her problems. Naturally, my dad thinks it's my duty to hand over not just my house, but also my hard-earned money to bail her out of her bad decisions. This is the same man who didn't think twice about rejecting me as his responsibility when I was younger. But now, with my new job, my recently purchased house, and a solid income, he can't stop talking about how we're family and how important blood ties are. Let me tell you, I could do without his constant reminders of who my father is. On top of that, he's pushing me to bond with his wife and her daughter, connections I don't want or need. Ash and I barely know each other, which isn't surprising considering my dad made sure to keep me out of the picture most of my life. Honestly, I'm grateful for the distance because if I'd gotten to know her better, I'd probably just be even more disappointed. Before I dive deeper, let me make one thing clear. I'm writing this just to get things off my chest. These are my opinions, my feelings, and my thoughts. You might not agree with me, and that's fine, but I need to vent, and this is the only way I know how. So, Ashlyn, my half-sister, is about 5 years younger than me. She's my dad's pride and joy, even though she's done little to earn that title. Let's be real. Her life choices revolve around being an escort and uploading explicit content on a failing OnlyFans page. Yet, my dad somehow sees her as his greatest accomplishment. It's almost laughable. I'm guessing he doesn't know the full story, and frankly, I'm not in a rush to be the one to tell him. Now, I'm not some uptight guy who looks down on others, but I do try to live my life with certain values. My career and personal principles matter to me. I like to meet women, sure, but I want to take the time to actually get to know them. Sometimes there's chemistry, but other factors, like distance or a lack of understanding, get in the way. And yeah, I don't sleep around. To me, waiting for the right person feels more meaningful. I can't understand why some guys brag about their body count like it's a badge of honor. It's gross, honestly. Ash, on the other hand, has a completely different outlook. She's likely lost track of how many partners she's had, and her chosen line of work makes it clear she doesn't share my perspective. Besides being morally questionable, her job is downright dangerous. There are some real creeps out there, and I can't imagine how anyone could be okay putting themselves in harm's way like that. Then there's her OnlyFans page, which, from what I hear, isn't exactly a success story. A friend of mine once told me she messaged him after they met for drinks, asking if he wanted to have some fun. When he told me, I was already annoyed, but he insisted he didn't know she was my sister at the time. Apparently, she sent him the link to her page, which he showed me. I couldn't believe it. Ash is always broke, constantly asking my dad for money, which only confirms that her ventures aren't going well. I've never confronted her about it, and I haven't said anything to my dad either. But I've seen enough over the years to get the picture. Once, back when I'd come home during college holidays, I noticed her sneaking into the house through the window at odd hours. Another time, I saw her getting into a car with an older man who handed her flowers before they drove off together. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on. As for her mother, Marissa, she's a piece of work herself. She used to be a flight attendant back in the day, and my dad, being the womanizer he is, was drawn to her. Now, she's a walking cliché of bad cosmetic work and entitled behavior. Picture a botch-faced Karen with claws for nails, and you've got Marissa. Marissa, my dad's wife, runs what you could loosely call the neighborhood daycare. Honestly, it's baffling how anyone trusts her with their kids. With those talon-like nails, she looks like she could accidentally poke a kid's eye out. And her personality? Just as sharp. She's always ready to insert herself into other people's lives, stirring up drama wherever she goes. Her voice grates on her nerves, and with the amount of plastic surgery she's had, I'm pretty sure she's carrying more artificial materials in her body than the Pacific. She's as authentic as faux leather, and the way she influences my dad is nothing short of toxic. Looking back, I'm convinced she played a huge role in my dad's decision to ship me off to boarding school when I was just 8. Raising someone else's kid wasn't on her agenda, so off I went. Now let's talk about my dad, the man at the center of this mess. He genuinely believes everything he does is justified, no matter how far off base it is. He says it's because he's lived a long life and knows better. One time, he even told me he regrets having me because I'm nothing like him. Thank God for that. My mom, on the other hand, was an incredible woman, strong, caring, and grounded. She always prioritized what mattered most, and took good care of my dad while they were together. But their relationship fell apart. Even then, she never spoke poorly of him to me. She used to say, "Your dad isn't a bad person, just a different person. And no matter what, he'll always be your father. Don't forget that." She didn't want to fill my head with bitterness, even though I'm sure he was as unbearable to her as he is to me now. They separated and divorced when I was 4. 2 months later, my dad married Marissa, and not long after, Ash was born. I turned 5 the same year. Life took another cruel turn shortly after that. My mom died in a car accident. I'll never forget that day. She was coming to pick me up from school, like she always did. She was never late, not once. But that day, she was 10 minutes late. To a kid, 10 minutes felt like an eternity. I kept waiting, and then came the news. A drunk driver had hit her car at an intersection. He walked away with minor injuries and a DUI. She didn't survive. I was left alone in every sense of the word. I sat in school for hours, waiting, confused and scared. When my dad finally came to get me, he didn't even bother to hide his irritation. I remember him glancing at Marissa with her usual deadpan expression and asking, "What should we do about him?" Her response? "Your kid, your problem." That's a memory I'll never shake. And now this same man expects me to take care of his spoiled daughter? No chance. I've worked too hard to let them ruin what I built. I've been on my own since I was 8, boarding school, then college, working any job I could find from the age of 15. I've scraped and hustled for everything I have. Now I manage a stable job and even run a few small businesses on the side. Recently, I achieved something I thought was impossible. I bought my own house. It's a cozy place, way better than the cramped apartment I used to share with friends. Moving into this house was a milestone, something I dreamed of for years. Even though I'm not close to my family, I thought inviting them to the housewarming was the decent thing to do. Their reaction was disappointing. My dad, in particular, couldn't hide his jealousy. He spent most of the time asking pointed questions about the furniture, the architecture, and the interior design. When I gave him simple answers, he fired back with snide comments like, "Wouldn't know, you never bothered telling me." It was awkward, especially with my friends, co-workers, and even my boss there. He made it painfully obvious how strained our relationship is. A week later, I got a call from him while I was at work, neck deep in a complex project. He said he needed to see me urgently, so I agreed to meet him. When I got home, I found Marissa sitting in the living room, her face twisted in anger, and Ash staring at me with puffy, tear-streaked eyes. My dad was in the kitchen, pulling beer bottles from the fridge. He offered me one, and I politely declined, already sensing this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I politely declined his beer, still worried about what he might say. I asked him directly what he wanted, and he raised his brows, responding with another question. He asked if I had finally started giving a damn about them. I frowned, genuinely confused, unsure of what he was getting at. He motioned for me to join Ash and Marissa in the living room. I nodded and walked over to a couch, sitting across from them. Ash had her arms folded tightly, while Marissa simply rolled her eyes at me. My dad sat down, beer bottle resting on the coffee table as he leaned back, his gaze steady. He asked if I were blind. There was a pause, a heavy one, filled with confusion on my end and growing anger on theirs. Before I could respond, he added that maybe I wasn't blind, but I simply chose not to see things that needed seeing. He said I had probably become proud ever since I bought the house, refusing to acknowledge the people who truly mattered to me. I sighed and pressed for clarity, asking what he meant. His voice grew more sarcastic as he continued, saying I was unbothered by the serious situation in the room. He insisted that I had decided not to see that the family was in jeopardy and refused to offer any help. I asked what jeopardy he was referring to, and his gaze shifted toward Ash, who rolled her eyes once more. She then announced through tears that she was pregnant. Like any normal person, I wanted to offer my congratulations. But before I could, she began sobbing uncontrollably. Marissa wrapped her arms around her and comforted her, while I was left standing awkwardly. Dad said I should know what was going on at home and care enough to ask. Dad explained that Ash had found out she was pregnant, and the boy responsible had broken up with her. Marissa added that Ash had decided to keep the baby, and that's where the decisions should be focused. All I could manage was a simple, hesitant, "Can she afford it?" The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Both Ash and Marissa shot me death stares, their expressions fierce and disapproving. I meant well, genuinely concerned that they were hinting at needing financial support from me. I was prepared to offer some help, but not at the expense of giving up my house. Dad then stood and walked over to my side, sitting down next to me. He said that's exactly why he called me, that he's a good father to his daughter, and that maybe my mother hadn't taught me how to be a good brother. He claimed that brothers give their lives for the comfort of their sisters. Excuse me, hell to the no. I knew financial support was important, but I wasn't about to give up my house, or my autonomy. I exhaled, trying to stay calm, and asked what he wanted me to do about it. He smiled and patted my back, saying, "That's my good boy." I plastered on a fake smile, which immediately faded as soon as his next words hit. "You're giving your house to Ashlyn," I said. "No, I'm not." "Yes, that's what I said," he retorted, his frown deepening. I told him I could help out with some cash, but the house was mine. I offered to let Ash have a room rent-free until she could manage, but I wasn't going to hand over the entire house. Dad exploded. "Nonsense," he shouted. "It makes perfect sense to me." It made perfect sense to me too, but he insisted I not only give her the house, but move out entirely, and buy a new one for myself. I argued that Ash couldn't even afford the bills or manage the house, let alone care for a child and deal with unemployment. Dad said those would be my responsibilities too. I was furious but held back my anger. Staying respectful, I stood up and told him it wasn't possible. I said I'd be leaving now. As I walked out, Dad didn't stop there. A week later, while I was at work, he somehow managed to get into my house. I don't know how he got the keys, but when I returned home, I found movers outside, taking boxes of my belongings out. I hurried inside, demanding to know what they were doing. They said the house owner had ordered them to throw my things out. "I am the owner of this house," I snapped, my voice raising. "Get my stuff back inside and leave immediately." They froze, clearly taken aback, and began hastily returning my belongings. I stood there, shaking with frustration, as the reality of the situation settled in. I'd lost my cool, but this was the last thing I expected to witness coming home. I went inside to find Dad and Ash still there, demanding I do what brothers should do. I told them to leave, but they didn't listen. That's when I stepped in and told them I'd call the cops if they didn't leave. Finally, they packed up and left, cursing me the whole way out. Now, I know this is a lot to read, but it was far worse in person. A week has passed, and I feel guilty about it, which is why I'm posting here. Was I wrong? I feel like they need me, and I shouldn't cut them off like this. But on the other hand, there are limits to what I'm okay doing for them. It angers me how disconnected and unbothered they were about me while I was growing up. Now, they expect me to lay down my life for them. Bit much, don't you think? Let me know. I can't even involve my friends in this. You all are all I have right now. Update. Hey, y'all. I hope you're all doing well. It's been a week since I posted, and honestly, I didn't expect it to get the attention it did. I read the comments as they came, and they made me question a lot of things. But soon enough, I decided not to cut my family off entirely. This decision came after I received a call from Ash. She told me she wanted to meet, and I accepted. She asked to meet at my house since she wanted to talk, but I was still recovering from the scene we had last time. Therefore, I insisted we meet somewhere else. We went to a coffee shop, and she was pretty uneasy at the start. Normally, she's pretty arrogant and rude, but she seemed unlike herself. We sat in the corner, and she began to talk. She told me she'd recently been broken up with. I responded, saying I had an idea since Dad said the guy who got her pregnant had left her. She shook her head, saying that's what Dad thinks. I asked her what really happened, and she told me that Dad believes her ex left her because of commitment issues, but in reality, it was her with the commitment issues. Shocking, right? She said she really cared for this guy, but a few days before she broke the pregnancy news, they had a confrontation. When they met, he wanted to confront her about some things, but before he could, she spoke first. That enraged him, and he got pretty crazy. In the heat of the moment, he put a hole in the wall. She said he scared her, and then told her he was breaking up with her, leaving without even hearing her response. Since then, she's been trying to call him, but he doesn't respond. He's only texted her once, saying she needs to get rid of the kid first, and only then will he speak to her again. But she has to get rid of the kid to even have that chance. Now, I know Ash isn't a saint, but this guy. I don't like him at all. I asked her what those things were that he found out, and she said it would be weird to tell a brother about it. I kind of understood that she was probably referring to the odd encounters with older men and escorting. So, I shrugged and said it's okay if she doesn't want to tell me. Before I could ask her what she wanted to meet for, she took a deep breath and let it out. Then she told me that she had been involved in shady things. I felt uneasy, not really wanting to hear the confirmation of all my suspicions, but I listened. She explained that she had wanted to pursue painting and become an artist, but Marissa told her it wouldn't provide a good life or enough money. Ash was told she needed to find herself a man as soon as possible. Soon enough, she started gaining the attention of elderly men, which grossed her out at first. When she told Marissa about it, Marissa said it was a good thing. It was the older men who knew what to do with their money, Marissa said, and they were the ones making money. Ash was only 19 at the time, and Marissa insisted that this was her only option to secure her future. College wouldn't, or couldn't, fetch her a comfortable life. Ash had youth, and there were many who would pay for that. She decided she wanted to become a model. She tried, going to many modeling agencies, but none seemed interested in her. Then she met a guy in his 40s who told her he could get her a gig. He took her to parties and bought her expensive clothes and jewelry for the events. She was happy until she was told about her first gig. It turned out she was to sell her time to a man in exchange for a modeling gig. She thought it would just be dinner, but it turned into a night, and she spent it. She did get a small modeling gig where she took photos for a small brand, but that was it. A few more men used her while she hoped for a real modeling opportunity, only to be told that they didn't select her. She then found out the guy who was investing in her was actually profiting off of her. It seemed unwise to confront him, as she feared he might have her killed. So, she told him she didn't want to pursue modeling anymore and was okay with minimum wage jobs. Thankfully, he let her go without any issue. She then tried waitressing at bars, which was pretty tough. That's what hard-earned cash is, Ash, she said. She also mentioned that Marissa would humiliate her for choosing to do those small jobs. Marissa would tell her that women are the beauty of the world and should only shine and smile like a showpiece, needing to be taken care of. So, Ash started going out with men only for dinner, charging for it. She said there were many loners out there who just wanted conversation, but that often ended with stalkers and obsessive men who thought they were owed more than what they paid for. Eventually, she decided that talking to men, making them feel connected to her, was more problematic than sleeping with them. That's when she started escorting. It worked fine until a friend introduced her to on the vans. She tried it out, but wasn't really good at handling a camera or editing, and it required a lot of social interaction, which didn't come easily to her. That didn't work out either. Then she met her BF, an ex-coworker who worked as a barista. They met again, and she liked him a lot. But he was too clingy, a little possessive, and didn't trust her much. Granted, he had every reason to doubt her because, at the time, she was still on the vans and escorting without his knowledge. She stopped escorting entirely from on the vans when her BF started taking care of her with the little money he made. She was fine with it. Marissa wasn't, though. Then she got pregnant, and her BF found out everything. She said she had a few men on the list who could be potential fathers. They all chipped in with money to support her and the kid. One of them even proposed to her, but she knew they were all doing it because they thought they were the only ones there, which she found ridiculous. She admitted she doesn't outright tell them that she's an escort, but it pays her bills and would probably help with the kid. Ash told me she decided to tell me all this because she couldn't tell Dad. Dad thinks she's only been modeling and making little money, and she had one guy in her life who left her when he should have stayed. Marissa knows most of it and suggests Ash marry the guy who proposed, letting him think he's the father. But Ash doesn't know what to tell Dad. Also, she doesn't want to marry the guy because he's weird and old, and she doesn't want to let anyone believe a lie. I asked her what she wanted me to help with, and she said some financial input would be fine. She also wanted me to make up with Dad. She suggested I agree to what Dad was asking and then move out for some time, after which I could come back when matters weren't as heated. I respectfully declined her offer and told her I could only contribute some cash, but wasn't okay with moving out of my own house. That's when she said I was selfish for thinking like that. She exposed her whole life to me, and I didn't have the decency to help her out. She even said Dad was right about me, and I deserved to be sent to an orphanage, not taken in when I needed a place to live. She got up and stomped away. I think my response wasn't too diplomatic. Slim now, I listened to her and hugged her. She said she was sorry for thinking it was me because Dad had just come home from meeting me when he confronted her. I forgave her, and then she went back home. While she was ranting and telling me about how pathetic she felt, she mentioned that Marissa was pretty quiet when Dad was talking about good women and their loyalty, like she couldn't say anything. Ash said one of the things she can't speak about. I asked her what she meant by that, and she said Marissa couldn't have an opinion since she's yoga. I could only frown in confusion before Ash continued on, with her crying as she narrated what else happened. Yoga, HM. It stuck with me. What do y'all think really happened? Is Ash going to be Dad's pride still? No one's contacted me ever since. I'm going to see and let y'all know though. I know y'all probably didn't expect me getting back to you so soon, but I couldn't help it. Update. Just 2 days after my last upload, and I'm here for the ones asking. Ash's ex's name is irrelevant, but we can call him Bob. Here's the new bit. So, the day before yesterday, I went to meet Dad. I told him I'd decided a few things. I said I wanted to help raise Ash's kid, and I was ready to lend a room to her. I would be okay paying for the diapers and other necessities, but she needs to get a job as soon as possible. Dad told me that then there'd be no one to take care of the baby, so Elle suggested she try freelancing or working from home. Dad wasn't his usual rude self this time. He took a pause and then sighed. He sat down on the couch and told me he thought I hated him. He was right, but I asked him why he thought that. He said it was because Mom hated him too. I quickly told him she never told me that she always told me Dad loved me and cared about me. I explained that the only reason I was disappointed was because of how wrong my perception of Dad was. Mom had told me everything, and what I felt from Dad was total neglect and lack of care. He rubbed his eyes and told me he hated himself for a lot of things. He said he liked Mom, but they hadn't known one another long enough to decide if they were actually each other's type. He sighed and said that he got her pregnant, and that's why he had to marry her. She was a good wife to him, but he never felt the spark between them. Then he met Marissa. When he said that, I could feel my insides tingling. I couldn't move. I didn't know any of this. Dad told me that Marissa sparked a flame in him he never knew he had. He was so happy with her, and before he knew it, he caught feelings. Before he could navigate his way through rights and wrongs, he got Marissa pregnant too. Then he told Marissa it was wrong, but it was too late. She was pregnant. He told her to wait. He wanted to tell Mom first. But Marissa felt insecure and came to our house. She told Mom everything. Mom confronted Dad, and he accepted it. It was a very ugly episode because Mom was extremely hurt, but even then, she was polite and asked Dad for a divorce. Y'all, my parents divorced because Dad had an affair with my stepmom and got her pregnant. I don't know how worse this man could get. Dad took a pause and looked over at me. He said that he spent a nice year with Marissa when Mom died, and he had to bring me home. Marissa hated everything about it. Again insecure that Dad might prioritize me over their baby somehow, because of guilt or whatever. So, he sent me away to boarding school for 3 years, and I never had to stay home long enough to cause Marissa any discomfort. Love makes you do stupid things, he said. I wanted to punch this man in the face, but I controlled it. I turned around to see Marissa standing in the doorway, water bottle in hand. She said she was just leaving for yoga class. She put her bottle on the table and went into the kitchen. I blinked, and before I could think straight, she was back and went through the door. I was numb, so I followed her out. I picked up her water bottle to return it when I got outside. She'd already gotten into her car and was driving off. I needed a drive to clear my mind, so I quietly sat in my car and drove, following her. She parked outside a yoga club and got out. She looked around herself and then started walking into an alley. Again, she looked around herself and got into another car. She hugged and kissed the driver, and they drove off. I could hardly blink. I clenched my jaw and parked my car. I got out and went inside the yoga club, asking them about Marissa checking in. They denied giving me personal info. I said I was worried about her and insisted they at least tell me if she were there. They told me they had no client with that name. I got back to my car and waited. And I don't know what came over me, but when that other car rolled in, I started making a video. A man got out, opened her door for her, hugged her, and kissed her. Her then slapped her, but as she joyously made her way to the parking lot. So much for yoga, Marissa. Before she could reach the parking lot, I left. So, my dad cheated on my mom, and now he's getting cheated on. Karma. Dad has called me a few times, but I didn't pick up. I'm going to see what happens because all I want to do now is go and ask Marissa about it all. Should I update? Hey, y'all. This is probably going to be the last update, I think. I know it's a week late, and y'all expected it to be sooner, but so much happened in this week. First, I actually managed to man up and go confront Marissa. I went when Dad wasn't home and Ash was asleep. I asked her if she had yoga class that day. She said she had it every day, even on Sundays. She was in the kitchen cooking pasta. I asked her who her yoga instructor was. She took a random name. I asked her if that was a dude. She said no and laughed. Why would I take a boy? She said. I told her it was funny that she had a female instructor when the club she went to didn't have any female instructors. She told me I was mistaken, but her voice was caught off guard, and her hands weren't stirring the pasta sauce anymore. I told her I joined the club yesterday, and that's what they told me. She asked me how I knew where her club was. I told her I followed her the last time I visited. She dropped a spoon. I picked it up, and she turned around. What are you getting at? She asked me. So I told her what I saw. She denied it as expected. I said I saw it with my own eyes. She shrugged and told me Dad would never believe me. I pulled out my phone and played the video. I told her he'd believe his own eyes at least. She stood in shock and was speechless for a minute. Then her expressions calmed down, and she continued to cook pasta. She said it didn't matter anymore. She was already planning for a divorce anyway. My eyes widened. This woman was despicable. Granted, my dad deserved all of it, but man, she's a snake. She told me that the guy she goes to meet at the club is her lover of 3 years now. They revived their romance when it was safe. She said they'd fallen in love long ago, but at that time, he was married to another woman whose father had hired him in his company. A lot was at stake. But Marissa and her lover decided that he would keep his marriage, settle his finances, and then divorce his wife to be with Marissa. However, Marissa got pregnant, so she was desperate to pin a guy down for support, as women should, she said. That's how she decided to keep Dad. They were seeing each other off and on, but then Marissa met her lover and got pregnant. She chose Dad and told him he had to do something about it. He got cold feet, so she had to take it into her own hands. That's when she spoke to Mom. Now her lover is a widower and owns a company. She's good to go, she said. Women need to do what they can, she said, and turned around with a smile. Her smile froze as she looked over my shoulder. Her smile was gone in the next moment. I turned around to find Dad in the doorway, fists balled, eyes red, and shaking. Well then. Dad woke Ash up and brought her to the kitchen. He asked her who her father was. She looked over at Marissa and shook her head. She told him she didn't care about blood because she always knew him to be her dad. He ran his fingers through his hair and paced the floor. Over the next 2 days, Marissa and Ash were told to leave his house. The divorce is in process. Ash and Marissa are staying at a shelter. Dad has asked me to find him a therapist, and he's apologized a lot since. I forgive him every time. As for Marissa, her lover didn't take her in. He denies having any contact with her. I have the proof, and Marissa has begged me for it. She's even asked me to think of Ash in her pregnancy. What can I say? Marissa, your kid, your problem. What should I do? Delete the video or hand it over? We'll update in the comments sometime later. Thanks for being with me for the suggestions and support. It means a lot.